The Burden of Silence, Fear of Mistakes by Alex Saul. In the shadow of the mountains lay the village of Windale, famed far and wide for its innovative architecture. The credit for this renown consistently went to John, the village's most celebrated mind, praised for designs he had never truly conceived. John was considered the smartest man in Windale. The villagers respected him for the masterpieces attributed to his name, creations that had transformed their small town into a beacon of ingenuity. Yet there was something peculiar about John. He rarely spoke during meetings with officials and engineers. When questions were asked, John remained silent, offering no opinions. But mysteriously, a few days later, he would unveil yet another architectural marvel, leaving everyone astonished. Some whispered superstitions suggested that John might have otherworldly help, perhaps from aliens. But in truth, the secret behind his brilliance was much closer to home. John had a quiet, unassuming friend named Ellora. To the villagers, Ellora was a nobody, a shy, silent woman with no visible accomplishments. She lived a reclusive life, tucked away in her modest home. Most dismissed her as useless, yet John was often seen visiting her. The villagers admired his generosity, believing his kindness towards someone so seemingly unremarkable was the reason he was so blessed with talent. But behind closed doors, the reality was starkly different. Ellora was the true genius of Windale. She spent countless hours in her tiny study, poring over books, experimenting, and drafting intricate designs. Her mind brimmed with ideas, but she was paralyzed by the fear of failure. The mere thought of presenting her work filled her with dread. John knew this. He had discovered Ellora's talent long ago and found a way to harness it for his own gain. Whenever the village announced a new project, John would visit Ellora under the guise of friendship. Ellora, he would say, have you heard about the new project? They want to build a grand viewing platform on the hill, overlooking the ocean. Ellora's eyes would light up. Despite her shyness, her passion for architecture was undeniable. She would dive into the project with enthusiasm, sketching blueprints and outlining every detail while explaining her ideas to John. But as her designs neared completion, John's tone would change. Ellora, he would say cautiously, what if you're wrong? What if an earthquake strikes? What if people don't like it? What if... The flood of doubts would overwhelm Ellora, eroding her confidence. She would begin to second-guess everything, convinced her plans were flawed. Don't worry, Ellora, John would reassure her. I'll figure it out. Just don't mention this to anyone. It's better if I handle it. Taking her blueprints and notes, John would return home, refine the details, and present the project to the village as his own. Fully prepared with answers to every question, he dazzled the townspeople with his brilliance and led the projects to successful completion. While the villagers celebrated John as a hero, Ellora sat alone in her small study, silently watching her ideas come to life without her name attached. She knew the truth, but her fear of mistakes kept her silent. The turning point. The cycle repeated itself as it always did. One day, the town's weathercasters issued a grim warning. A massive typhoon was predicted to strike Windale with devastating force. They estimated a 99% chance of destruction, with buildings likely to collapse and lives at risk. The villagers demanded action, strong walls to withstand the wind, and a shelter to protect against the storm. All eyes turned to John, the village's celebrated architect. Once again, the weight of expectation fell on his shoulders. At the meeting, engineers offered various ideas and suggestions. The mayor, Mr. Wilson, looked directly at John. John, he said, Do you have any ideas? As expected, John responded with his signature phrase, "I'll think about it." Behind the scenes, the familiar pattern began. John visited Ellora's modest home, where her brilliant mind immediately sprang into action. She immersed herself in the problem, sketching designs and drafting solutions. "Ellora," John said, planting the first seeds of doubt. "What if you're wrong this time? What if the walls fail? What if people don't like your idea?" But this time, Ellora surprised him. Her usually hesitant demeanor gave way to determination. "John," she said firmly, "I'm sure I'm not wrong this time. This isn't about recognition or approval. This is about saving lives. I want to do something." John's expression stiffened. For the first time, he felt a flicker of unease. He couldn't let Ellora step forward. He couldn't afford to lose his reputation, the admiration of the town, or the credit for her genius. But he didn't show it. Instead, he leaned into his well-practiced strategy, pressing harder. "Ellora," he said gravely, "did you even consider the consequences? What if you make a mistake? What if children, the elderly, and the people we love in this village die because of your design? Could you live with that? Could you forgive yourself?" Ellora's confidence wavered. Her chest tightened, her heart raced, and her breath grew shallow. The weight of his words crushed her resolve. "You're right, John," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. Please take charge. You're brave. You always know what to do. I'll tell you everything I've thought of. Maybe it can help." John smirked internally, sensing her collapse, but he wasn't done yet. He needed to ensure she wouldn't speak up later. "To be honest, Ellora," he said, feigning disappointment, "I thought I could use your ideas, but they're even worse than usual this time. They're too dangerous, and frankly, useless. I'll take your notes and see if I can salvage something, but don't get your hopes up." Ellora's shoulders slumped, her last shred of confidence draining away. John continued, his tone growing stern. "I'll handle it, as I always do. But promise me you won't speak to anyone about this. Don't cause trouble. Just stay here and let me take care of everything." With that, he gathered her meticulously crafted plans, shut the door behind him, and left. As the door clicked shut, Ellora sat in the suffocating silence of her home, watching yet another piece of her brilliance walk away in someone else's hands. Her heart ached, but the fear of mistakes, of failure, and of judgment kept her frozen. Meanwhile, John marched back into the world, ready to claim glory once again. The reckoning. As always, the villagers had full confidence in John. They trusted his genius and threw themselves into executing his plans. The construction of the walls and shelters moved rapidly, progressing halfway in just 3 months. Spirits were high despite the looming typhoon. With John at the helm, they believed they were safe, but fate had other plans. One evening, John climbed to the top of a partially constructed building to inspect the progress. As he leaned forward to get a better view, he lost his footing. The villagers watched in horror as he fell. John was rushed to the hospital, unconscious, barely breathing. Even the mayor, Mr. Wilson, hurried to his side, desperate for answers. The doctors delivered grim news. John had suffered severe brain damage. His recovery, if possible, would take at least a year, and there was no guarantee he would ever speak again. As the villagers learned of John's condition, a heavy silence fell over Windale. The typhoon was only 3 months away, and with the defenses incomplete, hope dwindled. The villagers prepared as best as they could, rationing food and creating makeshift shelters. Some accepted their fate, ready to face the worst. But that night, As John lay motionless in his hospital bed, his finger twitched. Seeing this, Mr. Wilson leaned closer. John whispered faintly into his ear before falling silent again. His message was simple. Ellora, help. The visit. The next morning, Mr. Wilson, without prior notice, arrived at Ellora's doorstep. He pounded on the door, startling her. "Mr. Wilson," she stammered. "What are you doing here?" "Open the door, Ellora," he demanded. "Please, not now." "Now, Ellora." His tone was unyielding. Reluctantly, she opened the door, her heart racing. Mr. Wilson stepped inside and froze. The small room was filled with blueprints, calculations, and sketches, the unmistakable signs of a master at work. The designs of Windale's most iconic structures covered the walls and desk. "Ellora," Mr. Wilson said, his voice trembling. "John fell from the construction site last night. At the hospital, he kept calling your name. I need the truth. Are you the one behind Windale's success?" Tears welled up in Ellora's eyes. She began to cry, unable to hold back the years of hidden pain and fear. "Yes, Mr. Wilson," she admitted. "It was me, but I've never had the confidence to step forward. I was too scared of making mistakes and letting everyone down." Mr. Wilson's expression hardened, anger flashing in his eyes. But he quickly pushed it aside. "Ellora, the typhoon is our priority now. Do you have a solution?" Ellora hesitated, overwhelmed by a wave of self-doubt. Memories of John's manipulative words replayed in her mind. What if you're wrong? What if people die because of you? Suddenly, she ran to the table, grabbed her carefully crafted blueprints, and threw them into the fireplace. "No, Mr. Wilson, I can't do it," she cried. Mr. Wilson was stunned. "What do you mean you can't? You've been doing it all along. You're more capable than anyone else in this village." "No," she shouted, trembling. "If I make a mistake and people lose their lives, I'll never forgive myself." Mr. Wilson's face darkened, his voice firm. "Ellora, what you're doing is selfish. You're hiding your knowledge, denying the village your talents, all because you're afraid of blame. Mistakes are part of leadership. We don't expect perfection. We trust the most skilled person to do their best, and that's you." "But—" "No excuses, Ellora," he interrupted. "I'm giving you two choices. Either you step up and take responsibility, or I'll tell the entire village the truth tomorrow. If you refuse to help us, you'll have to leave Windale. You can't stay here if you don't care about us." Without waiting for her response, he slammed the door and left. The decision. That night, Ellora sat alone, torn between her fear and her sense of duty. She had always avoided responsibility, hiding behind her fear of failure. But now, the weight of the village's survival pressed down on her. As dawn approached, she made her decision. Would she leave the village forever, or would she face her fear and finally claim her rightful place as Windale's savior?